Welcome back, everybody. Sprockets Projects. This, of course, is my 69 Buick Skylark 4-door. What we are going to attempt today is to replace the rear suspension. Because if you look over here, behind the trash can, you see there's a lot of boxes. I basically have the entire rear suspension, new spring shocks, control arm bushings, spring insulators, which is basically just the little rubbers that they sit on, keep it from squeaking. But so what we're going to do here is we are going to attempt, all right, get down level with it, so you can see right now where the car sits with the weight on it. And then once we get it done, we'll do this again to see if it came up any. But once I get the car jacked up a little bit, I'll get up underneath here and I'll show you a little bit more about what's involved in doing this. Okay, folks, small piece of advice. Your tools are what allow you to get your jobs done that you're working on, so tool maintenance is an important part of that. Now, these bearings up here, they do come pre-greased. However, every once in a while, since they're hard to get to without actually disassembling it, you want to squirt a bit of oil or something in there to keep them lubricated, keep them free and moving. So they'll actually rotate when you want to turn this thing. I've been having problems with that, and I finally took the time to do it instead of just to keep fighting with it. And the other thing is, these shafts, where the big wheels go on, this is completely dry. So it's not going to want to rotate very well unless you lubricate it. So, small piece of advice, take care of your tools. That way the tools can do the job you need them to do. All right, so here is my box of rear suspension. As you can see, AC Delco, even the springs. So these are basically all for the 4-door. I had wanted to get like ones for the wagon for the back to make it sit up a little bit, but they weren't available. So it says rear springs, shocks, all the control arm bushings, and a white box down in there is the spring isolators. So basically, new rear suspension. Okay, so if you're like me and you don't have a lift at home, this is going to be the best way to do this. Get a couple tall jack stands up underneath the frame, as you can see on both sides here, and then take the tires off so you can let the suspension completely extend. Now the only thing holding this up right now is the shocks, and once we release those, it'll come even further down. Now the reason you do this is to relieve all the tension off of the coil springs. You can just see the bottom of it right there. But like I said, focus you. This is going to be the easiest and best way to do this if you're working on the floor like I am. Show you more in a minute. Okay, so got the bottom shock mounts off. Now, if you scroll around over here and look, we're supporting the rear axle right now with jack stands because I don't want it hanging down too far because we're not pulling the springs just yet. So what we're doing here, it'll probably be easier to see this one. We got to pull these bolts out because that's what's holding the shocks in. So we'll get those out of the way. Basically, the springs themselves are going to be like the last thing that I do. We're going to do the control arm bushings first after we get the shocks out of the way. So we got the lowers. This is your rear. Front one, of course, is on the other end. And then you got your uppers right here. This here's a 4-link suspension. It's something GM started, I believe, in the late 60s. Because before that, it was usually, it had a, what the heck's that thing called? Panhard rod. And a single one that just went straight from here up to the frame. Usually it was on the top of the axle. Now my 70 Caprice, that one had a dual, it was a 4-link, but instead of coming off the top like this, because that was the full-size car, it just went straight from here up to the frame instead of coming off at an angle like this. But this one, the Chevelle body style like that, I think they're called A-bodies. I'm sure somebody will correct me when if I'm wrong, but They all got this style rear where it had the ears up here on the top. So once we get the shocks off and we start working on the control on the bushings, bring you back. One thing I forgot to mention, even though I've mentioned it before, I'm going to say it again. With rusty bolts that you probably have no idea how long they've been in there. I can't tell you if these shocks have been replaced before or not. I would think they have been, considering how old the car is, but always try to tighten it just a little bit first. That breaks loose the rust and the torque on it, then try to loosen it. 9 times out of 10, you don't break off bolts when you do it that way. Shock bolt.
Alright folks, Gears here. This is the upper shock bolt. Let me put it over here in the light a little bit so you can see it a little better. Sometimes you got to be careful pulling these out because you never know who's been working on them before, and more often than not, most shock tops come with a bolt and a threaded receptacle. Sometimes you find them where it's like this, where the bolt has been put in with a nut on the other side instead of a threaded receptacle. So this is what we found on ours. Just be careful, that way you don't snap either one. You may need a wrench on one side and a ratchet on the other. Bring you back later.
Alright, so if you want to know if your shock is bad or not, when you go to pull it, compress it. If it doesn't come back out, it's bad. That's the easiest way. Now, as you can see, we have the shock mount right there where it attaches to the axle. I didn't have to take those off, or I didn't have to leave it in the axle because my new shocks actually come with new ones. So, even though I may never be in there again, doesn't matter if somebody else is, and he sees the threads. Good rule of thumb for anything. It doesn't matter if you think you're going to be back into it or not. Just Annie sees them, so that way, if for some reason you have to be, they come off easier. Show you more in a bit. Alright, so this is the first upper control arm we got out for the rear. So as you can see, all of these cracks on both sides here, this is why we're changing this out. Now, the one that was on the axle, without the right tools, you ain't getting that thing out. But we took a look at that one. It doesn't have any of these cracks in it. It's in good shape, so just going to leave it be. What I don't understand, I got to figure out, is if you look at this thing from the side, this thing's been sitting in there cocked. I don't know why. When I went to pull this side out of it, the bolt, as soon as I got it through this side, it just cocked sideways and didn't want to let it out. And then once I let it relax, the bushing where it sits in here was like offset. So that's something I got to figure out, is why is it offset? Because it shouldn't be. So, anyhow, show you more in a bit. Alright, so, one down. Let me check that, that can be a little tricky. That's what I was talking about. Make sure you anti-seize the bolts. Now, inside of there, they're going to see the inside of this hole right here on both sides. So sometimes water seeps in there and then it'll rot it away and then it'll snap right there on the inside. That's why I said make sure you anti-seize them. Now, these have mechanical locking nuts, which just basically means the end of it's squeezed a little bit to make it tight on the threads. Don't anti-seize those. Because you want those to stay tight.
Hey guys, Gears here. This is the second one in. Now we've still got quite a few left to go, but that's 2 down.
Alright, here is the first lower control arm. As you can see, got the new bushings in there. Now, this one here, there's some access issues. Now, you'll have to excuse the light over here, but that hole right there, and we get in there, hey, now you can see it. That is where this front one mounts. So I'm trying to block that light so it doesn't blind you. Right up here in this pocket. The only access you have is through that hole to get to the nut. Now, there's not a whole lot of room down underneath here for you to be able to get that nut out if you drop it. So be very, very careful putting that back in there. Obviously, the bolt comes through from this side. My anti-seize finger. So, yeah, moving right along. All right, quick tip. You can barely see it in there, but anytime you're using a deep well, and it actually is a true deep well, if you put a second nut of the same size in there, when you're trying to get into that tiny little hole, sorry about the light, and my light didn't come on. Oh. No, it doesn't want to come on. But either way, that front control arm hole, get your second nut in there, that'll space out the one that you want to get started on there, so that way it stays in the socket and it'll actually thread onto the bolt that you're trying to get it into without dropping it. Quick tip. All right, here's number 2 lower control arm. New one's in there. Now see, I got to make this an authentic restoration. This is why I'm leaving all of the old foliage in there and the spider eggs and everything like that. There's also a spider in here somewhere I dislodged when I was putting these in here. But he went and hid underneath one of the new bushings. I'm going to leave him in there too. Well, could be a her. I don't know. But if you're wondering why I'm not painting it and cleaning it up and everything like that, because I want to drive this car. So it's solid. It ain't rusted through. It's not pitted real bad. I'm going to leave it be. Show you more in a bit. Okay, now that we got the control arm bushings replaced and the upper and lower arms are back in place, now none of them are tight. It's going to be just like the Nova. We got to have the weight of the car on it before we can actually tighten anything up. But to get the springs out, you have to have the shocks out because they'll hold it up. You got to get this thing to come down low enough that it'll let the springs release. Now here's the kicker on that one. Got to keep an eye on the brake hose that comes from the frame down to the axle here that feeds the rear brakes, because you definitely don't want to drop this thing and snap that right off. So I'll show you more in a minute. Okay, so new springs are in. Now these are a little bit shorter than the old ones, and they're also, I think, what they call a progressive spring rate, which means basically you got these tight coils here and then they spread out further. Now according to the instructions, the tighter coils go to the top. I put it in backwards the first time, so good thing we checked that after I did the first one. Oops. So what we ended up having to do was one of us had to put our foot on top of this thing, even after completely releasing the axle. It was just hanging here off the control arms. It still wasn't quite enough clearance to get these out. So we had to shove down on here and do one at a time, get these things out of here and put the new rubbers up in there, which you can barely see. Ooh, there's a floaty going by. I don't know what that was about. But, yep, so those are in. Now we're working on shock mounts. As you can see, like I said, we got new ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grease this shaft right here, because that's what the rubber rides on for the shock. So that way I got no squeak, plus it's also going to be less wear and tear on that rubber. Don't think... Yeah, well, easier to remove later, but I don't think I want to anti-seize those threads. Actually, wait, it's got lock washers. So yeah, I'm going to put some anti-seize on them threads. But up in here, you can see those 2 bolt holes. That's where the shock mounts up there. The 2 bolts, I'm definitely going to put some anti-seize on those before I put those in. In fact, I think the wife's working on that right now. So, show you more in a bit. Okay, new shocks are in, new hardware. All mounted up in there, both sides. As you can see, it's really close, but... So next comes the fun step. We got to get the jack to go up far enough to take the weight of the vehicle, so we can get these jack stands out from under it. Then what I was thinking what we'll do, maybe, is put 2 jack stands underneath the axle itself so we get the jack out of the way. And then we got to tighten down all these control arm fasteners. And then that part of it will be done. We just put the wheels back on and rear suspension is complete. Show you what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so new suspension is done in the rear. What do you think? Does it look like it's sitting any higher on the tire? Hey, stop squishing it. I know it's good. It's brand new, it better be good. I don't know. Looks like it sits a little bit higher to me. The wife says it does. It definitely squishes better. It doesn't go boing, 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 boing like it used to.
Go straight down.
Mm-hmm. So, that's it for now. Have a good one.